All right, welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Bruen. Our special guest this week, none other than Ed Helinski from the World Wrestling Federation. Ed, thanks so much for joining us today.
Joe, thanks so much for having me. I feel honored. You're like the mayor of New England when it comes to pro wrestling. You know that?
Well, I don't know, but I appreciate that. Well, thank you for being here. Really looking forward to a deep dive into the career of yourself. And, before we get to the wrestling portion of it, let's kind of talk about prior to pro wrestling, kind of growing up as a kid and how you got your foot, right in there in the WWF.
Well, I grew up in Western New York in a small little town called North Tonawanda, which is between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. Um, Very fortunate to live in that area and grow up in that area because, in terms of pro wrestling, we had wrestling from Toronto, Maple Leaf Wrestling, we had wrestling from Hamilton, Ontario, and of course, we had wrestling from Buffalo. And as a little boy, I used to watch wrestling with my dad, wrestling from the Odd, meaning Memorial Auditorium. That always was Friday nights, and we would watch wrestling together. And you kind of got an inkling and an education about the business at that point, even at an early age. So, uh, you kept it as a hobby, kept it, as something to laugh about, something to see how really storylines um, were created. I mean, the bad guys back then were all Germans, Hans Schmidt, Waldo von Erich, and whatnot. And Toronto, you got to see guys like Tex McKenzie and Sweet Daddy Siki and Whipper Billy Watson. Um, so, I mean, we got to see a lot of it. And then they would bring some of the boys from Detroit, George Crybaby Cannon. And, you got to see some different, and the original Sheik as well, too, who was a badass back then as well. But getting back to your question, I became a sports writer and started writing about high school sports for the local newspaper when I was age 15. And at that point, stayed around after high school for a year at a junior college. And they gave me a beat, the North American Hockey League, which was the premise for the movie Slapshot.
Oh, wow.
So the things that you saw, team being barricaded in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the fans coming through the bus. Yeah, that happened. That was true, and I was there for it.
Wow.
And I'm 18 years old at the time, and that just shows how old I'm going to be. That movie was filmed, 49 years ago. So I mean, it's just like do the math, and you'll figure out how old I am. But went away to school. Indiana University. Lee Corso of ESPN fame was our football coach. Of course, Bobby Knight was our basketball coach. It was great to have a Big Ten education. Came back to Buffalo, worked at a few newspapers there. The last newspaper, the Courier Express, closed. Um, Went to grad school for a year, then took a job in Auburn, New York, here in the Finger Lakes, as an assistant sports editor, sports writer. And lo and behold, in June of 1983, a wrestling show, a World Wrestling Federation show, was coming to the local community college, and that just perked my interest. I said, "Oh my goodness, let me try to get credentials on something like that." And I contacted the World Wrestling Federation. They were based on Cape Cod at that point. Spoke to a guy named Ed Cohen, who became a dear friend for many, many years. Unfortunately, he's passed away. I think his wife still runs the Providence Civic Center. Um,
Cheryl?
yes. So Ed Cohen made a deal with me. He says we don't allow mainstream media in. And I said, look, I grew up in the Western New York area. I got a pretty good idea about pro wrestling, and I'll do something very respective. So he allowed me in. The provision was whatever we did, we send to him. And so, Steve Taylor and I, a member of the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I, went to this show, and it was packed at the college. I mean, people were sitting on top of one another. It was so great. We had, guys like Sergeant Slaughter on the card. Swede Hansen, I remember, was on the card as well too, and Arnie Skolin was the road agent. So we did a piece for the Friday newspaper, and then on Sunday, Steve put together a picture page, and that's when newspapers did picture pages back then because couldn't sell the advertising. So hey, let's make a picture page and entertain and inform our readers. So we did that. And that appeared on Sunday. I clipped everything out, mailed it over to Cape Cod and Ed Cohen on Sunday afternoon. And Wednesday morning, I'm getting a phone call from Ed asking um, if Steve and I would be interested in flying down to Cape Cod and interviewing for a magazine position, the magazine that they were starting. And I'm single and footloose and fancy free at the time, and Steve was married. And we took the interview. And about a week later, we flew down to the Cape. Was interviewed by a couple people there. We were hired on the spot, and then negotiated our salaries at that point. It was a done deal, rather fast and rather quickly. So when we're getting back on the plane back to Syracuse, and we got off the plane, I remember in the car ride is like, what the hell did we just do? And are we crossing over from mainstream journalism? Will we ever be able to come back? Um, and Steve was more worried and because he was a married guy at that point. That's uprooting your wife and that. So we took the job. Our first gig was Madison Square Garden. It was the end of July, I believe July 30th, and what an eye-opening experience that was. Fred Blassie took me under his wing right away. Steve went ringside and was shooting. And at that point, Vince was taking over the business. So guys like Bill Apter and George Napolitano, those guys were banned from the arenas and couldn't shoot ringside. So that was part of Vince's plan to, with the magazine and control the media, that this way he was going to start his national expansion and get his magazine and get uh, his product front and center to the American public.
So what a first day. I mean, you're arriving at Madison Square Garden. It's the Mecca, and that's how you're kicking it off for your wrestling career. Um, can you kind of rewind? Do you have any memories of that very first experience arriving to the Garden, as an employee, and what that whole day was like for you?
Well, you go into the garden, you go in the side entrance, and you're taking the elevator up at that point, and you're just backstage in awe. You're doing a lot of looking and what I call sponging. You're just taking things in, and Fred Blassie must have saw the deer in the headlight look for me because he grabbed me right away and said, "Come here, kid. I'm going to teach you about the business." And there was another gentleman, Professor Elliot Marin, who was there backstage as well. He's, just go to the ring and grab the ropes from the guys and whatnot. And some of these guys, taught me about how much money changes hands and the gambling that goes on amongst friends during a wrestling match in Madison Square Garden and some of the other venues in the Northeast. These guys would gamble on finishes back then, and you would see, 20s and 50s being back then, the early 1980s, 80s, money changing hand quickly, and they were gambling on every match at that point. And of course, Fred Blassie, in his own special way, would go outside the curtain from the gorilla position before it was the gorilla position, and go out there and just rev up the crowd. And some of the things that he said to this day, I still can't repeat. I mean, Fred was notorious for generating heat and revving the crowd up and getting them all worked up into a frenzy. And Fred had been doing that for, hell, at that point, he was, 65 years old. Um, he'd been doing it probably close to 45 years at that point.
Yeah. Now, Freddie Blassie, one of the true legends in pro wrestling, of course, a member of the WWF Hall of Fame, wrestled for many years, legendary manager, and he was, the fashion plate, as they say. Um, you know, Classy Freddie Blassie is one of those individuals that Um, Back at that time, there just wasn't a ton of footage of, behind the scenes interviews and stuff. Everything was kayfabe. And so you didn't see it as often as you would now with all the different shows and programming that they have. So your first influence really in helping you along was Classy Freddie Blassie. What was that like? Kind of working one on one with him for a little while there and getting to know Freddie behind the scenes.
You got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree within about 2 months with Fred Blassie because he taught you so much about the business and how people react and how to draw money in the business as well too, and how guys get put over and what happens to guys when uh, the push is over with. Um, we saw a lot of that as well too. You have to understand, TV taping every 3 weeks. We had in Allentown and then Hamburg, Pennsylvania. We were starting to see new talent coming in every TV taping period, and then consequently, you saw some guys getting pushed out. Guys like Ivan Koloff, they were on their way out at that point, and you felt bad for Ivan. Ivan was a great guy, a great talent, a great worker, but like all wrestlers, you have a shelf life, and his shelf life was over with, and that was determined by Vince and probably some of the road agents as well too. Can this guy draw money, or are we just keeping him around for the sake of filling out cards? Whereas we could work with new talent and develop new talent storylines with these guys, and see where this thing goes. Back then we had different tiers of wrestling venues. We had high schools and colleges. We had the mid markets, which I call like the Syracuse, New Yorks, the Albanys, the Rochesters, even Buffalo. But then these guys worked their way in the finishes and the different angles. And then by the time they got to Baltimore or Philly or Boston or New York or even Hartford, they knew what was going to draw money and what was going to help for that show and the next show afterwards. Are they going to have a return match at that point? And what type of box office draw they could generate at that point. It's completely different from what it is today. If you look at the WWF website, the shows are minimal at best, and it's all based for TV. Not saying it's wrong, it's just a different business model, and they're looking to draw as much money as they can, and they're trying to generate money as well from the overseas markets, which is fine too. I mean, the organization is now a publicly traded company, and they've got to answer to their stockholders. So, as much money as they can generating from TV contracts and overseas money, God bless them. But it's a shame that families are being priced out. You look at WrestleMania coming up. The prices of tickets for WrestleMania, it's insane. Um, unless you're a corporate, unless you got really deep pockets, you really can't afford to go to WrestleMania. Yeah, you'll watch it on now ESPN, but it's not the way it used to be.
And regardless whether, people like Vince or not, from a business standpoint, that was the model that he always kind of, went after was getting the families there and the different generations of family. And that's how it kept it going and that's how it built. So now the way it is, how are we going to get that next generation of family to attend once this generation kind of goes away? How is it going to continue on?
I think it's more than likely they're going to be glued to their TV sets and paying their $39.95 a month to see wrestling at that point. But it's unfortunate that they won't be able to enjoy it the way I enjoyed it, you enjoyed it, and a lot of different generations did enjoy it. So, that goes back to Vince Sr. Vince Sr. always believed in families as well too, and making it family friendly and affordable. And Vince Jr. kept that going, um, and he did well with it. I mean, we did a lot of shows back in 84, 85, 86, 87. Insane schedules because he was making his money through volume.
So a two-parter for you. You arrived in the WWF in 1983. When did you hit your comfort zone? When did you finally start to feel like, okay, I belong here. I'm comfortable with my job. This is, you're really having a good time with it. Number one, and number two, you're less than 2 years away from WrestleMania one. When did the rumblings start kind of bouncing around the locker room or the offices of, we're thinking about putting together this huge event and nobody knew what it was called yet, but, kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Um, Answer your first part. There was at that time period, and probably to this day, there's no time period where you feel comfortable working for the WWF. It's the entertainment business. One big slip up and you're out the door. I mean, it's just that's just the way it is. I mean, the other thing too is you have a shelf life. So as long as Vince can use you for what he sees fit, and the organization sees fit, you'll stay around. If not, they'll replace you with someone else. So, and that's what I mean. I spent a year as the magazine editor, and I moved out. They got what they could out of me. I'm a newspaper writer. I'm a newspaper reporter. I'm not a magazine writer in a magazine. Um, you know, a magazine person, quite frankly. And what drove me crazy as well too, and I'm not bitching. I mean, I'm eternally grateful for the McMahons for the opportunity. People would, give body parts to switch places with me. Um, but the changes that we would make and the rewrites that we needed to make, because we're writing for a magazine a month, 6 weeks out. And that's an eternity in the wrestling business. Guys come and go, guys get fired, guys get hired. Um, Angles aren't working on the road, and someone else comes up with a different idea on what the storyline should be. And so we didn't have, a lot of writers. It was me. So you got pummeled with this stuff. Um, Plus, we were doing not just a magazine, but we were doing a monthly program as well too that we're going to the venues. Those sold very, very well. Magazines sold very, very, very well. I mean, Steve Taylor shot some great photos. We were in full color. I mean, and then we were dabbling in the merchandising end as well too, and that was starting to explode as well too. At television tapings at Allentown, if you saw um, foam fingers and T-shirts in the first couple rows, that was done intentionally. Those were plants because we knew that we could get the younger generation that would be bugging the shit out of their parents to buy this stuff for them, and they did. Um, Beautiful merchandising, beautiful marketing opportunity at that point, and taking advantage of the family atmosphere at that point. So building up. That was building up. Vince was going out and getting into different television markets because in wrestling, you succeed, the more eyeballs are on you. And they were contesting, getting into Cincinnati and St. Louis and Kansas City, and those seemed to be hotbeds. Yeah, we had Los Angeles, but we weren't in the Bay Area at that point, or up in Portland, Oregon, where Don Owen had his territory up there, and the territories were getting broken down. Stories have it that Vince went to a lot of these promoters and say, let's work together, or I'll buy you out. And when they scoffed, Vince came in and steamrolled them and took all their talent. And that's what happened in a lot of these territories, including the AWA and Vern Gagne.
Now, do
But
you think that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
getting back to WrestleMania, we were building this up. And I remember being in a conference room, and Vince was there, Linda was there, Howard Finkel was there, and we talk about this show that Vince wants, the show of all shows. And we were kicking around names. We did that for a lot of TV shows as well too. For the record, I came up with the name All American Wrestling for Sundays on that USA Network. Never
Oh,
got
wow.
credit for it, never got money for it, but you know, people in that room knew all about it. Now, getting back to WrestleMania, there's people. Howard Finkel takes some credit for it. Some other people say it was one of Vince's drivers that came up with the name, whatever. But it turned out to be the greatest name for that. And the stories that come out about Vince mortgaging his house probably are true. Um, you know, the stories that, oh my God, this is going to make or break the business if it doesn't succeed. Well, that was always the business was healthy beforehand. And Bob McMullen, who was the CFO at that point, has gone on the record um, in the last 10, 15 years and said, no, the business was sound. I mean, would have taken a big hit if WrestleMania was not successful. Um, yeah, but the business still would have survived. But it was a litmus test for the wrestling business on how big could this go, and is this a turning point? And this is going to propel the WWF into the stratosphere and leave others behind, or is it going to be everybody's going to come closer together and it's going to be the divide won't be as big? So I mean that was, and then when they did the angle with Mr. T, and T had his uh, popular show, the A Team, and the first year he came in, and he was very pompous, and he you could call him an asshole. Um, and I know the guys like Roddy Piper were not happy because they were bringing an outsider in, and the guys believed in kayfabe and wanted to keep this close to the vest, and they weren't going to do a job for a TV actor. Um,
Yeah.
so there was some tension with that as well too, but bringing Jim Troy and Troy, and then they're locking in the venues for the closed circuit TV was tremendous, and then bringing in Muhammad Ali, Billy Martin, Liberace. I mean, now it's like now we've gone Hollywood. Now we've gone mainstream. Plus, we had that rock and wrestling connection with MTV already, and we became a lot more mainstream. So a lot of eyeballs were on us across the country. Whether you were a wrestling fan or not, it piqued your interest.
And during those meetings, was there an actual moment where, Vince basically wanted those particular celebrities, or did it kind of just turn into that's who he got? Did he always have them in mind, or were there other names mentioned that they didn't end up doing?
You know what? I'm not privy to that, so I can't answer that question. However, I'm sure that they were a lot of things kicked around. And unfortunately, the only person who probably could answer that is the late, great Howard Finkel. I mean, Fink was a dear friend. We played racquetball together for years, and we went to New York Jets games together, and Howard always played it close to the vest. He never tipped his hand, nor he was very loyal to the business to the day he passed away. And I dearly miss the guy. But Howard would know. Howard was the first employee and the one that was never terminated. I mean, he was rather unique.
That's the thing. He was employee number one, been there since the beginning, and was there for so long. And he was so well respected, and he kind of had his hands everywhere. He was doing a little bit of everything, odd jobs, and over the years, of course, on top of being a legendary ring announcer. So you were friends with Howard. What are some of your personal memories of Howard? Any stories you could tell us about Howard?
Howard and his wife Kathy at that time. I mean, great people. You know, living and it just they were very accommodating. They would invite me over for dinner, and uh, Howard was always good. I mean, he when I first came aboard, Howard was very accommodating. You have to understand back then there was no technology like a laptop or a PC. I mean, everything was done on the old Smith Corona typewriters at that point, and God forbid you made any mistakes. You didn't have correcto tape in it. I mean, um, and you really had to try to get your thoughts um, straight once, in your writing style straight as quickly as possible, or you're just retyping stuff over and over and over again. So Howard tried to introduce some technology ideas that um, we played. We of course we played. Racquetball together. Howard was a pretty good softball player as well too. I mean, we used to have guys like some of the managers. Come visit us during the games. Jesus, I'm trying to think of the one, Lord Alfred Hayes. And Lord Alfred Hayes I don't think he knew anything about softball, but he would come and he'd always have a Pepsi can in his hand. And I just looked at him one time and I says, Alfred, you sure drink a lot of Pepsi. He goes, Ed, my boy, this is gin. And he would come to the game sipping on gin while we were playing softball. And so we had guys like, Mike Breen and Tim White. Tim White was one of my best friends in the business, and I miss him as well, too. He was in my wedding. Of course, Jim Troy. Jim Troy was just a stud. Whatever he did. I mean, a guy who went to BC, played football, played baseball, and then became a pro hockey player. And he didn't play any college hockey. I mean, Jim Troy was a natural. Um, we had just had a lot of fun people to be with, including Howard. I mean, sometimes with Troy and Tim and Breen, you know, Howard was in the background because he just couldn't keep up with the antics that we were doing. But it was a lot of fun. It really was.
Well, I had the honor of becoming friends with Howard. We were good friends for about 10 years or so, and he hosted all of the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame induction ceremonies and was a part of the Fan Fest. So it was always a pleasure to work with Howard. And, his phone calls would sound like his announcements. Joe, it is currently 10:04 p.m. and on this Thursday, so always enjoyed the calls from Howard, and he truly is missed for sure. Such an
I
important part
spoke
of
I
the
spoke
business.
to Howard about the holidays right before his passing, and I called at the facility that he was at, and of course at that point I didn't realize Howard couldn't really speak that well anymore. Um, the illness has really taken a toll on him, but he got on the phone. Um, and I said, Howard, do you remember me? And he goes, yeah, 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 yeah. And then he would always say, Tommy Dreamer, Tommy Dreamer, Tommy Dreamer. And from what I understand, Tommy Dreamer really looked after Howard that last year or so, or when he was in the facility there. But Howard had his faculties; he just couldn't really express himself anymore, and that's unfortunate. And and whether he died because of stroke complications or COVID or both, who knows? But I miss Howard. He was quite the influential person in this wrestling business.
And you spoke about another person who we just lost too soon, Tim White, who is another cornerstone of the WWF, and obviously, the handler of Andre for so long, and he had the legendary friendly tap and uh, long tenured career as referee. So, what are your personal memories of Tim over the years?
We had a lot of fun together. Um, a guy who could handle himself like he did and be able to handle a guy like Andre the Giant and keep them both safe and out of trouble. And as you know, Andre liked to drink, so they were always going to a bar somewhere on the road. And Tim would just sense things that guys would want to come up and try to pick a fight with Andre. And we ran into that situation one night in Buffalo. Tim invited me and my fiance, my wife now, to meet them after the show, which we did. And we're in a corner of the bar. We're away from everybody. And the next thing you know, there's two or three guys in a hurry coming towards us. And Tim just turned around, put his hands up, and said, Not tonight, fellas. Not tonight. You really don't want to do this. And somehow he was able to just diffuse these guys. And I looked at Tim and I said, How did you know this was happening? He goes, I could feel it. I could feel the rumbling on the floor. I could sense it. He goes, Plus the other thing, too, it happens all the time. So he knew out of the corner of his eye. I mean, he's got a beer in his hand, but he still knows that it's coming. And people don't realize that Tim White was a pretty good boxer, and he could handle himself pretty well. Um, and Tim was just a beautiful person. And that same night, uh, we're having a couple cocktails with Andre, and Andre, my wife and I got talking about our upcoming wedding. Now that was 5, 6 months out in advance, and Andre looked at us and said, "Can I come to your wedding?" Sure. I mean, it's something that they normally he can't go to normal places.
Yeah.
Uh, he's got to sleep diagonally on a king size bed. I mean, it's two seats on an airplane. But I remember him asking my wife, what color are your bridesmaids gowns going to be? And that's just that kind of question that you never knew that would come out of him.
Right.
Um, we gave him the date of our wedding, and he knew in advance that he couldn't. I could not attend. I'll be in Hartford that night. It's like he was brilliant, but he was also he drank too much, but he had a lot of fun in his life. You know, I mean, the stories are legendary, and they're all true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of it. And for Tim to um, go along with it, God forbid Tim tried to go toe to toe with Andre, try drinking, he'd be dead by now at that point. But you know, I would keep tabs with Tim over the years, and we got together a few years ago, about 3 or 4 months before he passed away, in Florida. Of course, it was an Irish bar, so I mean, Tim was in his glory. So um, and we talked about a lot of different things, um, and he like shed some light on the wrestling business and how Vince can be a very very forgiving person. Um, and that's why a lot of the boys came back, got fired and got rehired and whatnot. But he also pointed out that Vince will use you as long as he feels he needs you, and then when you're done, you're done. Just a promoter in Vince, and you can respect that at that point. So, I mean, I made my peace back with Vince, and I think '94 was a couple months before the steroid trials, and caught up with Vince in Syracuse, and we had a nice conversation, and I got no bones to pick with the man.
Now, Tim White was the first referee to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame just a couple years ago. Do you think moving forward we'll ever see any other referees or behind the scenes talents be inducted?
I hope so. I really do. I think there's a lot of people who are the Hebners, I believe, are worthy of that as well too. The late great Joey Morella, the Gorilla Monsoon's son, is worthy of it as well too. Um, these guys are just as important as the boys in the ring. They're the ones who are controlling the time of the match and making sure everything goes well with that. And and sometimes these guys get injured, like Tim White. I mean, his shoulder injury. Um, that's what forced him to retire from refereeing. I mean, just the grind. People don't realize that they these referees got to stay out of the way of these behemoths, flinging themselves against the ropes or going off the top rope or some of the other acrobatic stuff that they do during the course of a match. Um, yeah, there should be more referees in there and behind the scene people inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame.
Do you remember your very first encounter with Andre, meeting him for the first time?
Yeah, it wasn't pleasant for
Oh,
me. Um, you have to understand when we were hired and we very rarely went backstage. That wasn't our place to be unless we were delivering something. And I remember delivering something. I forget where the building was, but I was delivering something, and I think maybe to Arnie Skoland. And they're playing cards. And Andre looked at me and he goes, "Get out." And I thought he was joking. I said, "Well, I'm just here, I'm just an employee. I'm just, dropping something off." And Andre, "Get out." And then he stands up. You don't want Andre standing up because he's gonna throw you out. Says,
right.
"Okay, boss, I'm leaving." It's just like, but uh, Andre didn't trust a lot of people. It took me a couple of years to gain his trust, and then we became pretty good friends. My last 2 years in the business, but yeah, Andre treats everybody the same. You got to earn your stripes with him.
Sure. Now, of course, 1983, when you entered the World Wrestling Federation, who were some of the agents at that time? People running the the matches, and obviously later days we saw Jack Lanza, Arnold Scaldin, George Steele. But who was doing it at that time?
You had Arnie Skolin,
Oh, he's okay.
Gorilla Monsoon was a road agent at that point. Um, Transitioning into that was Chief Jay Strongbow, and he's a whole different category right there. Chief was not the easiest person to work with. Um, he's just a mean spirited guy. He probably ruined a lot of wrestlers' careers. Um, but you had guys like that. Arnie was you have to understand Arnie was still a part owner in the business from Capital Wrestling. Grillo was the same way, and with Vince taking over, they were a little bit unsure and suspecting of what direction this is going and how this is going to turn out. Um, and in the long run, it turned out very, very well when the money started flowing in. What was really interesting about this is that these guys would come in, the road agents would come in off the road maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, and they had their suitcases full of money. And when Bob McMullen became CFO, they changed that rather quickly. They didn't want these guys carrying money around. They were stashing it underneath the beds in their hotel rooms and just taking way too much risk. So uh, they set it up where these guys were making money drops at banks. And the road agents had a problem with that. It's like, oh my God, we got to go to a bank now. And it was something that they weren't used to at that point. But it turned out for the best at that point. Get the money into the system. You got to remember, Vince bought the business for $1 million from his father. He had 1 year to pay it back, or the business referred it back to his father. So there was a lot of pressure, um, and that was every venue, every show was critical on what the dollar amounts were going to be, the box office was going to be, and that was tracked heavily. You just had to keep because we were adding more people on, not just the wrestlers, but in the office as well too, and that's an expense. You got to meet payroll. And, at that point we moved from the Cape in November of '83, and we're in Greenwich, Connecticut. We've got to the Taj Mahal, on Holly Hill Lane. It's like,
Right.
whoa. And we didn't have, national advertising dollars at that point. So everything was
Yeah.
based on box office.
So when Vince Jr. purchased it for $1 million from his father, was his father still attending some of the events at that time early on?
Yes.
He
Yes.
was. Okay.
Oh yeah, he was. He would still come to I would see him at the Garden. I would see him at television taping in Allentown and Hamburg. Um, he was transitioning himself out of the business, but he still wanted he didn't want to be an abrupt change at that point. I don't know exactly when he was diagnosed with being sick. Um, he passed away in midway through 1984. Um, but I remember him having the quarters in his pocket and jingling it. I mean, that was his. I'm not going to say gimmick, but that was his comfort zone. Was just doing that idiosyncrasy. Um, he really never told. You never knew what he was thinking, Vince Senior, um, and that's okay. I mean, he was the man in charge and had been in charge for many, many years, and you respect that. I mean, he brought the business to where it was at that point, sold it off to his son, and may not agreed with how his son was approaching things with, breaking traditional bonds and business relationships with the other territories. But in Vince's mind, to go national, you got to break some rules.
Did you have many interactions with Senior?
No, no. From what I understand, and Vince would say it, Vince and even Linda would say it, Vince Senior had a problem with why are we coming to Greenwich, Connecticut? Why are we got such this office space? You know, Vince Senior could uh, run the organization from a telephone booth. I mean, and he probably did. I mean, you make your phone calls and book the wrestlers and book the boys, and book the buildings. That's all you needed to do at that point, you know?
Yeah. So it was Vince Jr.'s idea to kind of establish a, an official office space for it.
Well, it was because he wanted to attract um, Madison Avenue and national advertisers. I mean, that was the goal back then to start that process. And the first guy that he had, Phil Francher, um, nice guy, but he didn't get things done in terms of advertising. And there was also pushback from Madison Avenue saying, "You're pro wrestling. Go back to where you go. Crawl back under the rock that you guys are. I mean, why are you coming to us for big dollars and trying to woo national advertisers? It's not going to happen." So it took a long time for that to break through on that. I mean, a lot of it was made easier through the Rock and Wrestling Connection at MTV. I think in a crazy way, John Stossel getting knocked around by Dave Schultz probably helped matters too, because now it became in the forefront, and uh, we became top of mind awareness. So I mean, things changed at that point. And now, were we making the ourselves family friendly? Yeah, that appeals to advertisers. So it's just the advertisers taking that step and taking that chance and going, coming over to professional wrestling or the dark side, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big step for them.
Now, obviously, Titan Sports have had different locations over the years, some shorter than others, and then eventually the Titan Towers on Main Street there in Stamford. I think you said your involvement was Holly Hill Lane.
Holly Hill
So,
Lane, and then I went over to marketing and merchandising, and then we had a warehouse location um, on McGee Avenue in Stamford. It doesn't exist anymore. And then we moved um, over to the east side of Stamford as well too. And I can't remember the location, but that's where they started. They built the studios at that point.
so what were those facilities like that you worked out of day to day?
Um, Holly Hill Lane was great. I mean, it was one big floor. Um, we had at that point we had Jim Barnett on that floor as well too, and Jim was quite the character and was always looking for dirt. And he would whatever he could pick up in terms of scuttlebutt or rumor in the end in the innuendo, he would use it and leverage it. I mean, Jim was the ultimate professional at doing that. Um, then we had Linda down at one end, Vince down at one end. We were down at a different end of the building. Steve Taylor and I. Howard had his own office as well too. Ed Cohen had his own office, um, and then we had quite the support staff with secretary. So it was growing. When we went over to McGee Avenue, the marketing and merchandising, it was Spartan at best. I mean, we built offices there, so we looked somewhat professional, but it was a warehouse. You know, the other part of the warehouse, divided off was a auto repair place. On the other side of us is where they built uh, built dummies for to teach CPR. I mean, Red Cross dummies. Uh, so I mean that went well, and then with WrestleMania 3, when we emptied out the warehouse and taken all the merchandise to Detroit to sell that, we were also moving to the different location. This way, if we had any returns, it was going to be very minimal at that point. So it was a great time to do that. And when we got to the place on the east side, it was a huge warehouse at that point. It really, really was. Um, Merchandising was very, very strong at that point. I mean, it was really taking off, and anything that we showed on TV or put in a magazine or did a TV promo spot for, money was flooding in because people needed to have it.
So is it fair to say by mid 1984 you had kind of transitioned from a writer to the merchandising stand station?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
So in 1984, when you were more heavily involved in that end of things, what to your memory, what are some of the big items that you would see sell in mass quantities?
We would sell a lot of Hulk Hogan posters, Hulk Hogan headbands, anything with Hulk Hogan T-shirts, whether the red or the yellow ones. Um, Jimmy Snuka was strong at that point as well too. Magnificent Morocco, Sergeant Slaughter. We came out with a line, Cobra Corps in '84, and we came out with the slogan. We came out with the line, and the powers that be above me marketed this thing without even getting the products uh, officially uh, done through the suppliers, and they had no idea what the costs were going to be. But we were charging a certain amount for the Cobra cores, and it was like a blind thing, but it was something that was insisted on happening because Sarge was that just that hot. I mean, he had a great uh, battles with the Iron Sheik, and Sarge, transitioned to babyface at that point and would go out there waving the American flag and really could draw a lot of money on things like that. It was also the time period where, toy figures were coming out, LGN toys. And then, of course, Sarge was being approached by G.I. Joe. And that problem with G.I. Joe and Hasbro and LGN not coinciding led to Sergeant Slaughter leaving the WWF until his contract expired.
Wow. So when it came to a lot of those pieces like LJNs, were those, just to kind of give an idea, were those moving by, tens of thousands, or, you know, number wise, what were we looking at for the figures?
We had, we always had, that first year or two, we always had a cash flow problem. What I mean is getting product in and transitioning it out. We didn't order in mass quantities because couldn't afford to. I mean, we're still under that constriction of paying off that $1 million to Vince Senior. Plus, there was money being utilized for other projects as well too. Um, I wasn't privy to it, but I mean, we were limited. Hulk Hogan was our probably at that point we were at we were probably doing somewhere between $600, 600 or 700 um, Hulk Hogan T-shirts a month mail order. So it was
Wow.
quite significant. Just T-shirts. And then you got with the foam fingers, and you got with the headbands and the wristbands and the posters and that changed. I mean, that added to it as well too. And then we had the venue sales as well too, where you go to Madison Square Garden or anywhere in the Northeast, and you had deals with all these vending companies in these buildings, and that was bringing in a lot of money as well too. We very rarely had any Hulk Hogan returns. We were trying to put out as much as we can. It became a lot of juggling acts as well too. You wanted to put other products out like Morocco and Snuka and Slaughter stuff out there just to give variety, but people were clamoring for Hulk Hogan, and that's trying to get the right prices from the vendors as well too for just T-shirts. So it's just um, it was a juggling act. It really really was.
And speaking to the first two WrestleManias, how successful were the programs that were made for those events?
Um, anything with anything you know with that WrestleMania stuff was huge. People gravitated to it. I mean, you look at that. We may have charged, $5 or $10 for a program. I mean, minimum wage back then was maybe $3. I mean, T-shirts. I think we charged $20 for at that point. We probably in today's age we probably get $50 for it. But everything was relative in terms of cost. So WrestleMania. I'll give you WrestleMania 3. We did $550,000 in merchandise sales for that. Equate that to today's dollars, that's $1.65 million. That was a
Wow.
lot of product at that point. There's stuff out on the internet right now saying, where I signed off on a vending company at the Pontiac Silverdome. I think we sold, God knows, 3,200 programs, maybe 32,000. I don't even remember the number, but my signature's on it. And people say, "Is this you?" Yeah, it's me. I mean, I don't know where you got it from, but yeah, it's there. So we did a lot with that point. Our biggest problem with merchandising was the bootleggers in the various cities. We had bootleggers at outside every venue we went to. Madison Square Garden, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Hartford, Boston. People were jumping in on this to take advantage of it. We tried as much as we could get the police to shoo them away or arrest them, but they could only do so much. I remember WrestleMania 3. Once people came in the building, um, I was scouring the parking lot and had probably six bootleggers arrested. You couldn't see them with all the people coming into the Pontiac Silverdome, whether it was 78,000 or 93,000, whatever number you want to believe. There were a lot of people out in that parking lot. So it was really hard to spot the bootleggers, but they were out there. They knew what the bootleggers knew a good thing when they saw it.
Sure. So when it comes to merchandise, how do you keep track of it all? Kind of give us the ins and outs of merchandise. And you said WrestleMania 3, you pretty much emptied out the facility. How do you restock and what's that process like? How quick do you get it restocked?
Um, Depends on the lead time, depends on the vendor. It depends on what we're pushing. Are we bringing new product in, especially after WrestleMania 3? Um, you have to understand, computers back then were just really becoming mainstream at that point. So everything was on DOS. I mean, I don't think we were at the Windows 95 at that point. So uh, a lot of it was on paper. So what do we have physically, or what are you looking at physically on hand? And then you're juggling. We were back then. You have to understand, we were doing somewhere around 50 venues a month. So now you're juggling uh, what you're getting for mail order and what you need to send out to the venue, and of course you're basing what you're sending out to the venue on what the cards are going to be. So I mean, you always wanted to try to get as much Hulk Hogan merchandise out there because you want to ride the horse that got you there. But if you don't have any, you're not mass producing it. It makes it very very challenging. So when we would get returns back in from a particular venue, they were already immediately going back into inventory, and we including programs, and we were then recycling them and sending them back out to a different venue or using them to fulfill merchant mail uh, orders. So I mean, it was very tricky. It was very fast paced, and and it was very exciting. I mean, there was never a dull moment. No 2 days were ever alike.
And you touched base on, how Vince Jr. basically cherry picked from different territories. If he hadn't done that, if he hadn't taken the best of the best from different territories and promotions, do you think that somebody else would have, had what it takes to do the same thing? And would it have been somebody else if it wasn't Vince?
No, I think Vince was the perfect person to be able to do it. And looking at and who were leading the other territories, um, I don't think they were willing to take that risk. I mean, it was a big risk on Vince's part to go national. Um, but he lined up all the TV places as well too, TV stations to get his show on the air. And then he was getting into the different buildings as well too. So that was huge. TV buildings. And so you got the mom and pops, you got the families in there. They were buying tickets to the show. They wanted to be close enough to hear it all, see it all, and maybe get hit with some spit or some sweat from the ring. I mean, that's what they wanted at that point. I mean, and Vince provided that with that product. Uh, And to his credit, it went very, very well, and that's how he was able to do that. Would Vern do it? No, Vern wouldn't make Hulk Hogan champion, which I think was a big, big mistake. I mean, Hulk coming off of the Rocky movie as Thunder Lips, and you're not going to make him champion. This guy is red hot,
Right.
and you're going to settle for Nick Bockwinkel. Yeah, I know Vern, preferred the traditional wrestler with the amateur background and whatnot. But Vince, they're look at the if you look at the landscape of the promoters back then, uh, either they weren't big enough to go national or didn't want to take the risk national. I think maybe Jerry Lawler would probably be the close down in Memphis would be the closest thing to going national. Um, World Championship Wrestling in Charlotte. Could they have? Maybe. Did they want to take that risk? No. Were they being locked out of arenas in the Northeast? Yeah, they were. I mean, let's face facts. I mean, McMahon's were not going to let the competitors come into these buildings, and we faced that on the other point going down south as well too, or in the Midwest and over the West Coast. You know, we were coming into other people's territories, and some buildings we weren't allowed into. So, I mean, that's the nature of business.
And for you personally, whether it be on the writing side of things or the merchandising, how often did you travel, to the live shows, to the arenas, as opposed to how often you worked out of the office?
Um, on the writing side, I was on the road quite a bit, a lot, probably too much. It was part of the education processes as well too, but it was also seeing what angles were being done. Um, Back then, the angles, storylines, were developed by the wrestlers themselves and the road agents. Yeah, Vince may come up with an idea and they say, okay, boys, develop it. And so there was a lot of feedback from the road agents to Vince on whether this storyline was good. Today, from what I understand, they've got, writers that come up with these storylines that don't have wrestling backgrounds. All these road agents were former wrestlers.
Yeah.
So they understand the business and how to develop a storyline and how to draw money. I don't know if that's the case today. And that's another reason why they don't do a lot of venues anymore or not willing to take that chance anymore. They want to make their money from TV and TV deals and mega shows.
And in your positions, did the company cover hotels, flights, rental cars?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we went to yeah mileage. I mean, when we went to television taping in Allentown and Hamburg, and then later on when it moved to Poughkeepsie. Um, yeah, I mean they were really good about that. They watched expenses a lot because they needed to keep this thing profitable, and if you don't keep a control over expenses, it can get out of hand rather quickly. Now, boys, were getting their flights as well too when we were going cross country and going national. So that was another big added expense. They covered hotels. The boys had to get their own hotels or rental cars or whatnot, but we were taken care of by the office for that type of expense.
Anything that you were given over the years, or you kept that you kind of consider a prized possession of your time with the company that you still have to this day?
I have a autographed Andre the Giant WrestleMania magazine from 1987, where he signed that in front of me in March of 1987, about 3 weeks before WrestleMania 3.
Wow.
And I don't know of too many people that have something like that.
Yeah.
That is under lock and key, and that is, I'm being told now I have to get it authenticated, which is fine. But this is something that I'll probably go to my grandson, and hopefully it's going to, as the years go by, and Andre's been gone for what 33 years or something like that. It will appreciate in value. One guy who's well versed in the memorabilia thing. He tried to get it on the cheap from me, and I said no thanks. I'm not giving it to you. Couple $1,000, you better add a couple of zeros to it. I
Yeah.
mean, we're not giving it away. Um, the other thing that I still have is my friendship with Sergeant Slaughter. I mean, we're in contact. We reconnected in the last 6 years, and we're in contact virtually once a week or so. I mean, he checks up on me. I check up on him. I mean, he's still going strong at age 70, what, 76, 77,
Yeah.
and still, on the road 40 weeks or so a year.
Now, with your writing combined with Steve Taylor's, amazing photography at that time, um, it's kind of a match made in heaven. And, at that time, you obviously knew Steve previous to WWF, but shares, kind of shed some light. What are your memories of working with Steve so closely and your friendship with him?
Steve was a phenomenal talent. We worked together at the same newspaper in Auburn, New York. He was the photo editor at that point, and some of the shots that he did, and you have to understand, we had Tom Buchanan on the staff as well too at the newspaper, and Tom was very, very good as well too. So, and Steve had the experience working for Dirt Racing, where he was a photographer as well too. A gentleman named Glenn Donnelly here in nearby Weedsport, New York. So Steve also knew the setup, for putting on TV and putting on big shows or whatever. So when he transitioned from being the chief of photography for the WWF and moved into venue operations, it was it was a match made in heaven because he knew a lot of this stuff already and he brought a lot to the table. Um, Steve was well versed, very talented, award winning, um, fun guy. Um, Enjoyed being on the road with him when we were, and uh, was never a dull moment with Steve. It really wasn't. I would get him going, he would get me going, and we stay in contact a little bit, but he's too busy being up in the mountains in New England. There, he and his wife Angie. So, more power to him.
Now, when it comes to dining, you're going from town to town sometimes. Any favorite spots you like? I'm going to this city, got to make sure to hit this spot, or was it kind of just whatever you came across?
It was more like, how do I put this without sounding really bad? Um, we enjoyed our bar restaurants more than the restaurants. We weren't there for the food. Let's put
Right.
it that way.
Yeah.
We were there for where can we have some fun and have a drink afterwards. Um, in Stamford, a lot of us used to go over to Bobby Valentine's place over there in Stamford, and we were treated like royalty when we came in. And sometimes it became a pain in the ass because people would come up and bother us. It's just like, but when we were on the road and people realized that we were part of the wrestling show, we were treated like royalty. I mean, people, understood and said, "Oh my God, we got these wrestling people and the World Wrestling Federation people in our place. We better treat them nicely." So, um, any favorite places? Nah. Any favorite foods? Nah. Any favorite restaurants? Not really.
Any memories working with Gorilla Monsoon or his son Joey Morello over the years?
Grillo was I always well, he was from Rochester, New York. He went to Ithaca College. Um, he knew I was from upstate New York as well too. He it was a part owner, Capital Wrestling. He always treated me well. Um, Treated us newcomers with respect. Didn't know what to make of us. I mean, he still kept within the kayfabe, and back then kayfabe was still very, very strong. Um, but he was always gracious. Uh, would teach you some things, give you some lessons on history. Joey, was part of the ring crew and then became a referee, and he was a little bit more on the wilder side. But Joe was a lot of fun as well too. I mean, really didn't know at that point that his relationship to Gorilla Monsoon, that they were father and son. But and he never flaunted it. He never said, "Oh, my dad is Gorilla Monsoon. You gotta treat me differently." He never did that. Um, it's a shame how Joe passed away, and actually I was talking to Harvey Whippleman not too long ago about that, and um, Harvey was in the car with Joe during the car accident, and Harvey still gets very emotional talking about that, and it's just a shame, and it's a shame Gorilla's gone as well too. I mean, the way this business has changed, and he's been gone for well over 25 years now, and he just didn't, he saw part of it, and he was there for a big part of it, but he it's just a shame he's not around. I miss the guy. I really do.
A true legend for sure. Um, Now, with all the celebrities that have come and gone over the years, any interactions with the celebrities early on?
Um, we did. Regis Philbin was shared an elevator with Regis Philbin at Madison Square Garden, and if you ever next to Regis, he's like 5 foot nothing, and he's about as thin as a pencil. Um, and just trying to have a conversation with him, and he doesn't know me from Adam or whatnot. But it was a lot of fun. WrestleMania 1, I'm sitting in front of Billy Crystal. I'm in row 7, ringside at Madison Square Garden, and behind me is Billy Crystal and his wife. Now, we're dressed up in suits, me and two buddies, and we just turned back and say, "Hey, Billy, nice show last night," because they had Hulk and T on there before WrestleMania 1. And he just looks at us, go, "Oh, thank you very much." He doesn't know who we are. And then at that point in New York City, you fake it till you make it. And they don't know if we're important suits or we're just some bums dressed up nicely. So that's part of it as well too. Bobby Valentine, Bob Costas used to come backstage at some of our Madison Square Garden shows as well too. Getting back, very fortunate to meet back then those early days. Dusty Rhodes, Bobo Brazil. I mean, I grew up on Bobo Brazil, and to meet him and have a conversation with him was tremendous. Lou Albano was always a character to be around.
Yeah.
Um, he was a traveling companion with Fred Blassie, and more like Freddie was his babysitter, because if Lou got into the drinks, then anything and everything could possibly go wrong and go haywire and go sideways, and that was just Lou's nature at that point. But Lou was a very intelligent one man, the great Ernie Roth, the Wizard. And I only knew Ernie a couple months, but boy, he really impressed me. Um, he was very welcoming when we came into the business, and it's a shame that he wasn't there during the expansion, the explosion, nationwide explosion, because I think he would have done extremely well with that.
Yeah.
Now, would they have still brought in Bobby Heenan? Yeah, Heenan was a unique talent. But Ernie Roth as a wizard, getting under Vince McMahon's skin, he was 5 foot nothing on top of it, but he really had mic skills. Blassie, of course, had his pencil neck geek and flailing his arms up and down, or when he was with the Sheik, he become the Ayatollah Freddie Blassie and Bali Bali and all that, and Lou Albano with the pin in his cheek and the rubber bands as well too, and the shirt unbuttoned and the big belly hanging out. I mean, that was Lou. I mean, that's what made these guys great, and they served their time. They served their purpose. I'm trying to think of other celebrities. I remember Mary Hart checking in with me next at WrestleMania 3 at our hotel in Detroit. I mean, she was part of the show at that point. Billy Martin, having after WrestleMania 1, having a drink with Billy Martin, asking him who the the best baseball players were in his opinion, and you know, having a cocktail napkin autograph from my mother from Liberace at the party after WrestleMania 1 as well too. It's just like, and you're pinching yourself saying, "Oh my, I'm here with these. these people that there's no way that you can ever get to it in a regular lifetime.
Yeah.
And you're shoulder to shoulder with these people, and it's just like, and it strikes you that they're just normal people like you and I. They're just more famous.
Right. Take us back to that night, WrestleMania 1, the after party celebrating what was, they rolled the dice, they put it all on the line, and it was a success. Tell us how that party was, what it was like, who was there.
Rainbow Room above 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Um, Never been in there before, never have been in there since. Um, you take the elevator to the top. Uh, Me and a buddy of mine, we go to the party there. Billy Martin is there. He's in a sidebar area there. He didn't want to mingle with in the general public there. My buddy, dancing with Wendy Richter, the women's champion. I mean, that's the only type of place that you could. Spencer Christian, who was a weatherman with WABC out of New York City, he was there. I remember. Of course, Liberace was there. I'm sure there were other people there that I don't remember readily, but boy, the food was great, the drink was great, the night was great. Um, it's just a magical moment, and something to they knew that it was a success financially, and it was a great celebration. That's one thing with the McMahons, their Christmas parties and these type of events. They spared no expense when it came to celebrate something. Um, they really did it up really, really well. And what better place than the Rainbow Room?
Now, coming off of the success of WrestleMania 1, a year later, WrestleMania 2, emanating from not one, not two, but three locations. What went into that WrestleMania creatively as far as, how did that idea come about and how did it pan out, with three locations like that?
I don't know how that came about. I wasn't privy to that type of information, but they wanted to obviously they wanted to change things up from a WrestleMania 1, so it couldn't be compared to. Yeah, three different venues: Rosemont Horizon, L.A., and Nassau Coliseum, bringing in NFL players, over the top battle royal, going more mainstream with that. That was quite the risk, and trying to then coordinate the closed circuitry on these venues as well too. Um, Look at that, it was a sellout in all three venues. Probably close to 60,000 people between the three venues. Financially, it was a good deal, but did it have that wow factor? I don't think so. I mean, that was completely different. I remember sitting in Nassau Coliseum saying, I'm really bored. I'm watching this stuff from the Rosemont Horizon or LA, and I could be sitting home doing this. That it's just like you want that action in front of you. I mean, and we had pretty good seats at Nassau Coliseum, but you're looking up at a TV screen in an empty ring at Nassau Coliseum. So I think you lose that momentum from that. And since then, they haven't done that. Those different venues simultaneously anymore. I think they finally realized we could should can this idea forever, um, and rightfully so.
Now, once you left the World Wrestling Federation, what did you end up going on to? Same line of work or?
I had an eclectic career afterwards. Went into trucking transportation uh, for almost 10 years. Then I made the god awful mistake of getting into insurance. And then I went back into newspapers and media, but on the business side of it, as a marketing rep, selling advertising, whatever. Uh, I didn't have any interest in getting back into newspapers and writing again because there wasn't any money in it. And or if you're going to be, then you got to uproot yourself and move on like a gypsy every 2 or 3 years. And I was getting married, and we talked about having a family, so you wanted something a little bit more stable. Um, So, the last 15 years I've been in radio here in the Finger Lakes region of New York State. Started off as the marketing rep, and about uh, 11 years ago, program director came to me and said, "Hey, one of our sports broadcasters is showing up for games, and we don't want to lose the ad revenue." I said, "Hey, you're right." So I said, "Give me a shot, put me in." Now, mind you, back in 1983, um, Vince had me on the radio, WHTZ Z100 in New York City. Worst to first, that story. I was Easy Ed with the World Wrestling Federation report. So I was doing reports from Madison Square Garden, Nassau Coliseum, and the Meadowlands. And 25 years old at the time, and these old disc jockeys in New York City got pissed, and they went to Vince, at some Madison Square Garden shows. You would see, and they were chewing his ear off, like, "Hey, we had all this relationship with your father, and did this stuff, and gave him free plugs all these years, and who the hell is this snot nosed kid?" And so they took offense to it, and I learned a quick lesson about show business. It's cutthroat, it's dirty, and you know they don't care if the knives are coming in your back or in your chest. I mean, it's coming. And after about 6 months, Vince acquiesced and said, "Okay, we'll put these other guys, on the air," and that was fine. I mean, I got my shot. Scott Shannon was the one who's legendary in the radio business. Is when the one who was my mentor and was teaching me how to do it and how to pace myself and voice inflection. So I was able to do that and do high school sports, and I'm still doing high school sports to this day. When I first started, I said it ain't might not be good, but if we're not going to lose the ad revenue, we'll get the games on the air. But I've been very very fortunate. I retired from the radio group full time back in 2019, but I still do some business part time with them, selling radio advertising, and I do my radio broadcasts, or done some National Junior College broadcasts and broadcasts for the NFHS network as well too. So um, keep myself busy and to keep me in beer money.
And did you still follow the product at all through over the years?
Wrestling,
Yeah.
um, from a distance.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't like wrestling. She didn't want wrestling in the house when our kids were born. Um, but the funny thing, when my kids were on my lap and we're flipping through on the TV, and we come up to a wrestling program, my kids went absolutely nuts. We never talked about it, but somehow they knew.
Wow.
And it's like, oh, daddy, daddy, daddy. Okay, we'll go back to it. My wife would walk in the room and say, "What are you doing?" And the other thing about this as well too is when my kids were going to school, back then, is what does your mom and dad do? Well, my dad used to work in professional wrestling. Well, that's something that not too many kids can say,
Right.
And the funny thing about it with daughters, you're always very, very protective of your daughters. And these little boys would see me from their classrooms, and their eyes always got big. Like, oh my God, this guy worked in professional wrestling. And when they got older and you run across them, their eyes were still big.
Yeah.
And when they got to be young adults, and even today, their eyes still get big. And I'm not letting them off the hook, that no,
Right.
no, no, no. That's just the way that comes with the territory, pal. So I watch it once in a while. Um, do I sit there glued to it? Nah, not anymore. It was. I guess maybe I'm becoming an old fart, and I'm going back to the days where it used to be, and generation before that also lamented about the way it used to be. Bruno used to bitch about Hulk Hogan and his popularity, and it's just not the way it used to be when he was champion.
Yeah.
And I get it, but it's a younger man's game. It's a younger person's game. It's not my game anymore.
And when it came to writing, what was the difference between writing for World Wrestling Federation magazine, which was monthly, and then writing for the programs that you'd see at the live events?
The programs were always shorter stories because you had Steve could fill it with his great photography. So it was just a brief synopsis because you didn't know necessarily what the angles were going to be. Just like this guy is on a roll, or S.D. Jones was sent to the hospital even though he had a burst appendix on his own. I mean, and that was easier to do. Um, you could write as a newspaper writer because it's more matter of fact.
Yeah.
Now, when it came to the magazine stuff, they want a one man show guy writing like he's writing for Sports Illustrated. There's not enough time in the month to be able to do something like that. I had Jeff Walton who was doing something for me on the LA scene, but that was it. Once in a while, we would have a guest column from Lord Alfred Hayes. Other than that, or Amy McMullen back then did some things from a woman's perspective. But other than that, it was me and the rewrites and that. And after a while, it became a grind. Like, is Vince going to like this? Is he not going to like this? What's changed in the business that I'm not aware of? What's the external force driving him in a different direction? And oh my God, I only have like 3 days to come up with write a new story and have it approved and send it off to the agency in Boston who would put the magazine together. So, I mean, it became a lot of pressure. And sometimes you just threw your hands up and said, I give up. I mean, it's just like, in a way, when they changed, I was grateful. I really was. It's just like, okay, I did the best that I could, and it's just too difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned the king of the cocoa butt, Bobo Brazil. How was he backstage? What was he like to talk to? What kind of person was he?
Very quiet, very quiet, um, a professional. He knew he was coming in to do a job. When I met him at Madison Square Garden, he realized that he was at Madison Square Garden. It was towards the end of his career. Um, I remember Vince telling me this. He goes, he called him the blue lip. And I said, Vince, what do you mean? He goes, he is such a dark African American man, his lips are blue. So when I met Bobo, the first thing I looked at was his lips. And by George, it had blue lip. And at that point, it's you got to stay in character. You don't show any disrespect and start laughing. But Bobo was from Benton Harbor, Michigan. I always loved Bobo Brazil, but he was a great guy, great man to meet, and very fortunate. I wish what I know now that I should have known then, just getting autographs with these guys. And my God, if we would have had, cell phones back then, the selfies that we could have done. But meeting Bobo Brazil, huge.
And you mentioned Ernie Roth. You got to know him for a couple months there pretty well. What was he like behind the scenes?
Very quiet. Um, when the camera was on him, he could just turn it on like this. Um, of course, he was always very insulting in his interviews, but he knew how to get under people's skins. He knew how to um, appease appeal to people and how to draw money. And he was really good at putting his wrestlers over and making them seem important. He was very, very good at it. I mean, he had those multicolor sport coats, and the orange pants with the purple jacket, and sometimes he wore the turban on top of it. Whatever the character he was in, and whatever the mood it was. But Ernie was a great professional.
And I guess staying within the time frame that you were with the company, and even previous to that, seeing a little bit of it on television, um, who would you put together as the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling from that era specifically? I guess.
Well, that's a really good question. Well, you got to remember, I'm just a footnote in wrestling history, and I keep it that way. Um, but to answer your question, of course, Hulk Hogan. Um, he changed the business. He changed the dynamics of it. Uh, Number two, uh, wow, there was a lot with that. I mean, the Mount Rushmore. Yeah, Randy Savage could have some consideration. Sarge definitely has some consideration with that. Um, wow. Looking over the overall scheme of things, if we went nationwide, I mean, you can bring the argument can be made for something. Dusty Rhodes could be brought up in that era as well too. Um, he was very influential in other parts of the country. Um, Geez, to find those top four can be difficult. I can give you the second tier. I can give you the third tier, but wow, I mean that's. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just going to go with those two. I can't. I don't want to disrespect anybody by missing them unintentionally or sounding like a know-it-all.
When it comes to the magazines, I've always been a fan of physical media. And obviously, with technology, everything changes and we've seen it go digital and a lot of it's online now. We've kind of lost the way of wrestling magazines per se, magazines in general. Do you ever see the magazine coming back? Do you think we'll ever kind of see those in stores again, or has it just passed on us by?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Um, I like the tangible product. I like something that I think from a fan standpoint, if there's going to be more shows and venues, then that magazine can be used as something for people to get autographs from. Uh, or are people just going to rely on selfies with wrestlers? Maybe that's the case. Not sure. Um, Print by and large, it's dying, and it's dying a very slow death. And newspaper wise, we're seeing it. Magazines have taken a huge hit with that as well too. I'm not even sure what's left on the wrestling market. I think Pro Wrestling Illustrated is still being printed, but at one point they had 5 or 6 different magazines going on, and I think it's only down to PWI. So, um, WWE, well, their magazine's gone by the board as well too, for the most part. Maybe they'll come out with a special edition, or they'll have maybe a calendar that might come out. But really, it's really hard to say if things happen in circles in cycles. I don't know if I'm going to be alive still when that cycle comes back around. I really don't.
Well, you were there for the first run, and that's where it was. That's what it was all about. So now, when it comes to Ed Cohen, very influential. Vince's right hand man for a little while there, and he was the guy that would book the arenas and different venues. You became friendly with him, as you said. What are some personal memories of Ed Cohen, the man, how he was, and maybe a story about him?
He took a lot of pride in his work. Um, he took a lot of pride in booking shows in different arenas, and he especially took pride in getting into new markets. And he was very critical into Vince um, getting into new markets and negotiating deals to get in these markets. He worked then very closely with Jim Barnett as well too, because Barnett had a lot of connections. And Barnett was brought in because of his connections to different places in the country, especially down south. Or he knew, he was part of the old boy network of the NWA, with the different territories. And so Barnett knew all these characters, and he also knew the buildings and a lot of the building managers. So Ed worked with him quite closely, and that was, Ed Cohen doesn't get a lot of credit for what he did um, in building the business going nationwide.
And what would you say is your greatest memory during your time with the company? If you could choose one moment, one event, whatever it may be.
Wow, one event. Probably the night where Hulk Hogan in January of '84 won the title. The place was electric. Um, Iron Sheik only had the title, I think, 28 days. I mean, the funny thing about it, on December 26th, '83, I'm back in Buffalo, just finishing up Christmas holidays, and I said, I got to go to New York. I got to go back to New York. We got a big show at Madison Square Garden. And my mother looked at me. She goes, "Do you work for the mob?" And I said, "Well," I thought about it. I said, "Well, the Irish mob probably, but the Italian mob, no." But just the business at that point. But getting back to Hulk Hogan, that night at the Garden and the electricity and the anticipation of the belt changing hands and Hulkamania coming to fruition and the business changing at that point. The other one probably was WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome and seeing all those people there. And I was in an area with Bill Davidson, who owned the Detroit Pistons at that point and Tampa Bay hockey team. And he was just amazed the amount of people that were in that building and what was happening there. The other thing that struck me the most was the CNE Stadium in August of 1986, where a wrestling show Hulk was on the main event, and they drew 65,000 people,
Oh wow.
and that was the testing grounds. Can you make it big in that type of venue, and would Detroit be very successful? And it proved overwhelmingly. And Detroit for WrestleMania 3 was huge because you had all of Ontario to draw from. You had Detroit to draw from. You could get on a plane in Boston and New York City and be to Detroit in an hour and a half. You could draw from Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Chicago, um, a lot of places in the Midwest. So filling up that arena, impressive, but it wasn't out of the question by any stretch of the
You
imagination.
broke up there, Ed.
No, but filling that arena um, was not out of the question by any stretch of the imagination because you had Detroit was the perfect place to draw from. The Canadian fans, they were flocking. Oh my goodness, from Windsor, from Toronto, in all parts in between. I mean, you had the whole state of Michigan. You had Indiana below. You had Ohio not too far away. So I mean, Chicago not too far away. You had it all there.
Yeah,
So those really are the three that really stick out in my mind, and I'm very fortunate and very grateful to be able to be part of that.
absolutely. What advice do you have for an aspiring writer or even another position, somebody just kind of looking to get into the company in this day and age?
The wrestling business,
Yeah,
don't do it. It's not for everybody, nor should it be. Um, be prepared to take your lumps. You don't know those lumps are coming from. It is a craft. Work at your craft. Do a lot more listening than you do talking. Um, Pay attention to the history. Pay attention to the road agents. They've been there. They've been in those shoes. Um, be flexible. Things can change in your career. It may not just be writing. You may get switched over to TV. I did some TV besides writing on top of it, and I was also doing the press releases to these different shows as well too. So, talk about being stretched thin.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I had an administrative assistant, but it was really me. I'm my Selectric typewriter putting this stuff out. So I mean, there's a lot, or if they're ready, be willing to put out fires. I mean, Linda called me into the office once. We got a problem in Baltimore. I need you to call this fan. He's ready to start a protest about the Iron Sheik outside the arena. Okay, what do we got to offer this guy? Offer him, 2 or 4 tickets if you. So I called this guy, and this guy was pissed. I mean, that how dare an Iranian, you know, have a championship match against Sergeant Slaughter. I'm going to start a protest. Oh yeah, we ran into stuff like that. So I mean, you talk the guy down and say, you talk the
I
guy
lost you
down,
there
and
right after you said start a
you
protest,
say,
Ed.
look, tell you what, no reason to do that. Let me give you some tickets to the show. And he was happy with that. I mean, we would run into some goofy stuff once in a while with crazy fans. Oh my God. And you have to understand, we didn't have the mass media, the instantaneous technology that we have today.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine doing it today. That's insane. Where
No.
somebody tweets something out or a sound bite out and it goes viral, or a TikTok video or an Instagram post or anything like that. You really got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
But getting into the business today, be prepared. You may not succeed, and don't take it personal if you don't.
And from a merchandising standpoint, were there ever any duds, any pieces of merchandise representing a certain superstar that just did not move for whatever reason?
The only thing when it didn't move is when they were no longer around. Jimmy Snuka was a good example. Vince used to say, out of sight, out of mind. I can make anybody a superstar in 3 weeks by putting them on TV. But once they're out of TV, people forget about them. They're not red hot anymore. Their merchandise is not red hot. We couldn't give away a Jimmy Snuka T-shirt. Mind you, he had bad publicity back then, but it didn't seem to hurt too much. The girlfriend situation, but once he left or was banished or fired, you couldn't give his stuff away.
And what would happen to that leftover merchandise, once you're no longer selling it? Where do you do with that?
We would sit on it, and sometimes we would donate it to uh, a children's center or something like that. Um, people, they talk about the NFL stuff going overseas in these third world countries. Well, we didn't do anything like that. That would be too expensive to do that. But we would give it away after a while. I mean, it'd have to sit there for 6 months to a year,
Yeah.
because once in a while you still would get some mail order dribs and drabs that would come in, and people then wanted it for posterity's sake.
And as we wind down, two more questions for you here. The number one, memories of the Macho Man Randy Savage, Miss Elizabeth. Any interactions over the years?
I was always told, keep your distance from Macho Man. Yeah, you heard stories that Macho Man was very, very leery of the other boys, uh, and wanted to have his wife stay away from them. Is it true that he locked her in the dressing room? Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know for a fact. But I do know that he was very, very careful because his father was in the business, his brother was in the business. Randy knew this stuff can happen in the business. I mean, he was no dummy when it came to that. He was well educated by his father, Angelo. Um, Macho Man, when he came on board and we're doing the leaps from the top rope with the elbow drop,
Yeah.
electric, especially Madison Square Garden. They hadn't seen anything like. Yeah, they saw the Snuka splash, but Macho Man, he came out there and his attire, I mean, he drew a lot of fans. He became a fan favorite rather quickly.
And in closing, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be?
A guy who was in the right place at the right time and enjoyed the best time in professional wrestling history.
Awesome. Ed Helinski, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you here. Uh, Fans, hopefully you enjoyed this. It's been a great deep dive into Ed's career and into the World Wrestling Federation's earlier years. So thank you so much. The All Access Entertainment Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, and we'll be back next time.